this is that website if you want to get your mite check kit from the three great M universities, the collaboration. You can get them at this website here. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about this in terms of, especially for smaller beekeepers. So we've gone through 3 phases. We're entering the 3rd period here, the final period. And so we've talked about that there's no silver bullet, but we probably don't need one. But it's important that we're able to find the right kind of gun, be able to load the gun, and perhaps, and most importantly, able to figure out where the werewolf is. So you spend a lot of time trying to figure out where the werewolf is and understanding its behavior. And so now we're going to go and we're going to talk more precisely and concretely about what tools we have to control the mites. And so again, we've seen this graph several times with this picture. We know that the mites, they reproduce in the brood cells, causing damage at this level, which is critical for the winter. And they reproduce at a rate that they could double the population in the colony every month. And we've seen the national averages, and we can see that over the last 5 years that we've done this, that we see a lot of colonies. The average mite load in this country come August is in excess of what we think is causing damage to colonies. And certainly the average load in September and October is well above what we think doesn't cause damage. And so now let's go and talk a little bit about the Bee-Informed Management Survey results. I want to explain a couple of things here. So these, you're going to see these types of graphs several times. This is the average. So that bar is the average, and you'll notice these whiskers. These whiskers are not what you usually see as whiskers, as standard error bars on the data. Usually you see standard error bars. These are 95% confidence intervals. So how you read that is that if I were to sample this population again and again, that average would fall between these 2 lines 95% of the time. So that's what that means. And how we can interpret that with 2 different subpopulations of the same population is that if these 2 lines overlap, if those confidence overlaps, that means that the populations are not significantly different, that they're exactly the same statistically. If they don't overlap, as they don't overlap here, we consider them significantly different. So we know that there's a significant difference here. So this is the question we asked. Did you use any known Varroa mite control product in the last 12 months? And what you can see is that the people who reported using a known Varroa mite control product lost a lot fewer colonies than those who didn't. Now people look at this and say, okay, in this particular year, I lost 36% if I treated, or 49% if I didn't. Heck, I'm not going to treat. Well, first of all, I would argue that that's probably not the most responsible thing to do because you're setting off these landmines. And third, that's sort of a misinterpretation of this data because this data is monofactorial. We're just asking one question at a time. We are in the final stages of doing a multifactorial analysis where we include every management practice possible. So like, did you use screen bottom boards and a resistant stock and treat? And that would probably drive the population down because we know that there are beekeepers who are losing less than 10%. And so our idea is, well, how do we figure out what their management practices are? But because this data is so dirty, you think about all the variation on what you can do to your bees, that's really dirty data. And so we've had to wait for having 5 years of data and over 25,000 responses before you can statistically start sorting this out at that level. What is worrying here, though, is 60 to 70% of beekeepers report not using a known Varroa mite control product at all in the last 12 months. And so that's why I think Randy is very apt when he says a lot of small-scale beekeepers are mite farmers. They're not really beekeepers. Now, I think that it's useful to look at Germany and the history of treatment in Germany because they've been dealing with this problem for longer than we have. And again, I want to thank Peter for this. And so in 1982, when they got the Varroa mites there, they used this one product. It's based on fluvalinate, and they used this product pretty exclusively, just one treatment a year. Then that stopped working by 1987, and so they started using 1 to 2 winter treatments of Coumaphos, like Checkmate. They had liquid forms and all these other weird forms. But basically, a different active ingredient, a high strong product, using it twice a year, 5 years after the introduction. Then, in 1995, that didn't work anymore, so they started doing they had problems in the summer, and so what happened, they started using formic acid in the summer as a mid-season treatment, and then using Coumaphos in the winter. And then today, they have exactly the same thing. They have to be much more aggressive of mite levels. Mite levels can get out of hand too badly, and so they're having to treat more often. They do a drone brood removal in the spring. They do 2 formic acids in the summer, and then they'll do an oxalic acid treatment in the winter. And so you can see that in Germany, over that course of time, their treatment regimes have changed pretty dramatically. And if you've been beekeeping for a long time, you'll know that what we would recommend sort of in that same time frame over time will have equally changed. Now the one thing we have, like how many of you guys are backyard beekeepers? So most of you are backyard beekeepers, and it will come about to the fact that I think that there are some options you have that commercial beekeepers might not have. And so you may have a couple more tools in your toolbox. I want to give a shout out to this publication, the Honeybee Health Coalition. You heard Michelle talk about that she's a member there. I'm also on the steering committee here. They came out with this pamphlet you can download here that really has a succinct discussion about every available legal Varroa mite control product in the country. It's a great, I think it's a 26-page brochure, and you can download it for free here. Or just Google Honeybee Health Coalition, and then you'll find the Varroa stuff. So I would really recommend you get that and read that. That has a lot more detailed information about each single product than we have time to talk about here. So we're going to break this down and talk about each different product, but what I wanted to say is that here we have all the known Varroa mite control products, so these are active treatments, and what we see is nothing is used. So this is what the people lost if they did not use anything. The purple is for people who use this product, and the yellow is someone who used the product but not the product in question. So you can see here, Mattress, these guys lost fewer colonies than those who used another product, and certainly more than others. So we can look at all these different products. I'm going to go through each one of these products or groups of products together. I want to summarize them in terms of how to think about them. If we think about Mattress, Coumaphos, and fluvalinate, these are our synthetic products. These are our hard chemicals. They're the products we used first. When we first started using products, these are the products we had. These products are fairly safe in terms of humans because they're lipophilic. They like fat, which means they don't migrate into honey. They migrate into the wax, but that means it builds up in the wax. Then we have some of these softer bio-based products like Apiguard, Apilife Var. These are essential oil-based, so they're thymol, and they're fumigants. They're being used as fumigants. And then we have the hops. The hops, well, that's sort of a new product. It's changing pretty well. That's sort of jumped in with the bios. But then we have the organic acids, the formic acid, and oxalic acid. So let's look at those sort of individually. So this is 2013, 2014, and I'm going to show you this in 2 different years because it's important to realize we've done this 5 years and we don't always get the same results year to year. That's why you have to do it over time because it's correlative data. And remember, correlation is not the same as causation. But in 2013, 2014, basically you can see people who used Coumaphos or used fluvalinate basically lost the same number of colonies as people who reported not using anything at all. And that's because these 2 products have lost a lot of their efficacy. We have resistant mite populations. However, the next year, 2014, 2015, we did see the people who used the product lost fewer colonies than those who used nothing at all. But it wasn't different than any of the other products. So you can see this wide variation here. When you see a large confidence interval like that, that basically means that there wasn't very many people in that population. There was a very small sample size, so you get bigger variation. So some years this may have worked just as well, and some years it didn't. But again, our real concern is that it builds up in the wax. 38% of all the colonies we test, the bee bread we test, not the wax, but the bee bread we test, the bread that the bees are eating to feed the nurse bees, have these known miticides in them. And so we're feeding a miticide to the young bees, and that has negative effects on bees. And we can talk about that a little bit more later on. Amatraz use. Consistently, Amatraz, people who use Amatraz lose fewer colonies than those who use nothing at all, certainly, or use another known Varroa mite control product. Amatraz is one of the newer synthetic products that have been allowed on the market. It was on the market a long time ago. They stopped using it because the company got sued for killing queens, but it's been reintroduced. And it certainly seems like a product that's associated with lower colony losses. We can also ask the question, well, how many times did you use it? This is just commercial beekeepers here. So none at all, they lost about 34%. Used it once, lost 30%. Used it twice, 24%. 3 times, 20%. 10 times, very small number, but they used it 4 times, they lost 10%. So this is the number of times they used it in the last year. Now, when I see this data, and I'm a beekeeper, I go, oh, I know what I'm going to do. Now, but though this would be stupid, to use this product 4 times a year is a disaster waiting to happen. And I think it emphasizes the point that we are in a very tough place in terms of commercial beekeepers with the availability of products. Because if we're using a product 4 times a year, that's a great way of making sure we're going to breed a resistant mite. And so if you are going to use a product more than once in a season, you have to use a different product, even if it's just to knock out any of the potential survivor mites. So if you're going to use Amatraz and you're going to use it more than once, you want to couple that with an organic acid or with an essential oil-based product, so that even if you kill 99% of the mites, that 1% of mites that might be resistant to Amatraz can get knocked out by that other product. Just using one product consistently like this, despite what the data says, is in the long term a very short-sighted and stupid option. Was that pretty direct? All right. We also do mite resistance assays. So if you're part of a tech transfer team, you send in kits and we'll check the mite levels and their susceptibility to different products. We also do this randomly across the country. Basically, we put a handful of bees from your yard with your mites. As long as they have 5 or more mites per 100, we'll put them in a jar with a little bit of the product. We wait 6 hours. We count how many mites died. And then we kill all the mites and we figure out what percentage of mites died in the presence of the product. If a product is considered, or if a mite population is considered susceptible, it means that 85% of the mites die within 6 hours. We no longer have, or we have not detected any populations that are truly susceptible to any of our main products, including flumethrin, which isn't registered in the product. It's used in Europe, but it's our out control. So all the populations we have some level of resistance. They're not killing more than 85% of the mites. In fact, true resistance, though, is also rare. True resistance occurs if you have and I always get this confused, if more than 85% of the mites are surviving, we consider that a resistant population, and we had 1 or 2 colonies evidence of Coumaphos and flavalate. We have yet to find that in Amatraz. However, I will say that there are a lot of beekeepers right now complaining pretty hard about Amatraz. They're saying they're putting their strips in, and they're coming back and they're finding high levels of mites. And I think that's because there's been also a switch from the backyard in your kitchen recipe, where you made it yourself, and these strips. The strips release the product over a much slower time frame, and so you're not getting that same satisfaction of getting rid of all the mites right away. Also, the strips are a lot more expensive, and so you start saying, do I need 4 strips for real for 2 boxes of bees, or shall I just go with 1? Well, going with 1 is a lot cheaper, but it's also a great way of making sure you're not going to get adequate control, and it's a great way of making sure you're helping speed up resistance development. So it's also a short-sighted option to use low doses of the product if you're going to go with the strips. I will say that these synthetic products have a price. If we look at the different products we find in our colonies, the product that stands out the most, nearly 50% of all the detections we have are of Varroicides. And these Varroicides, I mean, we're killing this arthropod on an arthropod, right? And so it's hard to find that balance. And there's no question that the presence of coumaphos and fluvalinate and amitraz negatively affects the queen, negatively affects workers. But treating with these products is a lot like chemotherapy. You don't do it because it's good for you. You do it because it's better than the alternative. And so you need that treatment, but realize that there is this cost. Fortunately, we have some of these softer products available to us. So we have the oxalic acid, or the organic acids, like formic acid and oxalic acid. Really great products. We have some pretty good control with those. Same as the essential oils. Consistently, year to year, people who are reporting using Apiguard or Apilife Var have fewer colonies than those who don't. I haven't put in my idealized model of what I would do, but if I was a beekeeper, I was a commercial beekeeper, I would make sure that 40 days before I thought I had the super, I would put in a thymol treatment if I had detectable levels. So either Apiguard or Apilife Var. Then midsummer, so right at the peak of the honey flow, or if your honey flow ends early, right after you take your honey supers on, I would do another check, and if I had detectable levels of 3 or more mites in August, I would put on a formic acid pad. And I would treat a midsummer formic acid pad, and then I would clean up when my colonies got broodless with oxalic in the fall. So I would do a cleanup treatment. So I would have 3 treatments: essential oil, formic acid, and an oxalic acid treatment. I want to say something about formic though, because there's been some complaints about formic not working. But if you're doing a mid-season formic acid, so a hot temperature formic acid treatment, and you're doing it when it's really hot, what happens is when you put those pads on, that formic gets sort of flashed out there. Most of that formic, what it's going to do in its first 24 hours. And so what happens is that it actually gets under the cappings and kills some of the Varroa under cappings. And what percentage of the mites are under capping? 80%. So if you can damage them, that's real good because you're not having to wait for them to come out. But it turns out that sometimes it doesn't kill the mites. But what we think may be happening is that it's damaging the hairs on those pedipalps. Remember those pedipalps we saw? And so this means that the mites aren't able to smell the right stage brood anymore. And so often when you go in and you do a formic acid treatment and you come back 2 or 3 weeks later and you do a sugar roll, you have a heart attack because your mite levels are 3 times higher than they were before you treated. But that's maybe because, and we have some data for that in a published paper, we haven't done it with the mite strips, but I think it's the same thing going on. It's probably what's happening is that you have much fewer percentage in the brood because you've damaged those adult Varroa mites, so they're not invading the brood. And so for a while there, it looks like you have much higher mite populations than you do normally because they're not invading the brood. So sometimes that mite check after formic gives you an artificially heart attack. It's an artificial heart attack. You don't need to be nearly as worried. Wait another 2 weeks and check again.
Is that true with oxalic acid?
Well, oxalic acid, you only use that. It's only effective if you have no brood in the colony. So it's something you would treat with in November.
Would you treat dripping or would you treat with vapor?
I would not use vapor. I would use only dripping, and dripping is great when it's broodless. The vapor is a great way of making sure you clean out your lungs from all the fumes. I think it's just unnecessarily dangerous. I mean, there's no reason you need that. If you want to get a vapor that's really strong, use formic. I wouldn't use oxalic. I would just be too afraid. I'm too clumsy. I would kill myself with the oxalic vapor. I don't think they would have registered the oxalic vapor unless, but they did it because that was the way it was labeled in Canada, but I don't think they would have approved it for here.
From an effectiveness standpoint.
If you use it consistently, it can work for sure. The vapor can work. So my personal preference would be the thymol, formic, and drip oxalic when it's broodless. That's what I would do in terms of safety and all that stuff.
But you're in Michigan. If you're in Michigan in November, it's pretty cold to open up.
Yes, so you do it as soon as it's broodless. So I bet you guys are going broodless right now, are you? Yeah, so then do your oxalic when it's broodless.
Is there any temperature that you have to worry about?
For the drip oxalic, it just has to be broodless, and you drizzle it on
The
top.
outside temperature?
No, I don't think you have to worry. I mean, you don't want to do it when it's like, yeah. I mean, use some common sense. But if you're out there comfortably, you can do it.
The formic acid, is that the two-pad method or the one?
Yeah. So there's different methods depending on the temperature. So look at the label for that temperature. Yeah.
Is there resistance to formic?
No. No, and it's hard to say that we don't expect resistance to develop because every time you say something like that, it's going to happen. So, but I would say that if I wasn't thinking that I would just be contradicted. It's harder to imagine resistance developing because these acids are working as a mechanical. They're damaging the cuticle. They're doing something else. It's not like it's interrupting a biological pathway like the synthetic products are. Like they're interrupting calcium channeling between neurons or whatever. The oxalic is acting more as an abrasive. It's like mustard gas. It's hard to imagine we'd become resistant to mustard gas.
You would still recommend the alternating for others?
I would use thymol in the spring because I know it's effective in the spring, and the temperatures aren't yeah. So that's why I would do alternating methods. I think is a better way of doing it.
If you're treating the bees in November in the broodless state with something and knocking them down to some good percentage, those bees that are still going through or into winter are still damaged bees.
Well, yeah, that's why I would do the oxalic as my mop-up. So I've done my formic acid treatment to get my mites below that 3 level, and I might have 1 or 2, so it's still a low enough level that we don't see damage, but I would mop it up so I don't see spikes in the spring. Okay, so we've talked about the treatments where we're interrupting. Now I do want to emphasize this though. We've talked about these organic acids and these essential oils as if they're somehow better for the bees than the synthetics. Now they may be better, but nothing is free. And so one of the studies, actually in this study, I did this in Hawaii just as we detected the first mite on this side of the island. We wanted to treat colonies that didn't have any mites and then look at the expression of different stress genes in the bees to see if the treatments themselves had a measurable effect on the stress of the bees. So did they have an effect on the bees? And in fact, the answer is yes. And that was true for coumaphos, it was true for amitraz, it was true for formic acid, and it was true for thymol. So nothing is free. It's just don't keep dumping this stuff in there. It's still hurting the bees. It's just hurting the bees a little bit less. So that's the take-home message from this, which I have a hard time understanding too, so don't feel bad about it if you don't. There are other products we do. If a product gets mentioned in our survey by 10 people, we include it in the results. People who use powdered sugar, this suggests that's treating the whole colony with powdered sugar, which is something you only usually try once because you end up like a donut. But that did not work. There's no evidence that that worked. People fumigating mineral oil or spreading mineral oil, no evidence that that worked. Using garlic with cinnamon and some cow sweat also did not work. We did not find evidence that it worked. That's not saying it didn't work because it's correlation, not causation, but we found no evidence to suggest that that worked. But, again, so we can use this, I don't know why I put this here, let me see. So, oh yeah, no, I know why. So what we want to do is, also remember, we're talking about interventions, right? But if we can slow the population growth down, it means we have more time for our interventions. So if we can get to 3 mites per 100 in October rather than September, that gives us more time because in a lot of times we're just up against the rock and a hard place because we want to keep our honey supers on because we're making honey, but we know we should take them off to put the treatment on, right? And so if we can stretch that period out, that's good too. And so there are different things we can do to help stretch that time period. One is this new product that's, I think, going to come on the market in the next 3 years. This prevents the invasion of mites into your colony from your neighbors. So when the landmine goes off, this is how you prevent the shrapnel from entering. And that is, they're going to come up with these Varroa gates where the bees have to crawl through, and this is a treated strip. And so as they go through the treated strip, it removes the invading mites. And so I think you're going to see this happen in the next couple of years. The treatment, I think they're trying 3 different treatments: coumaphos, fluvalinate, and permethrin, I think is what they're thinking about.